Is Za'Darius Smith the final piece that the Cleveland Browns defense needed? We talk about that. Look at the Minnesota Vikings perspective of the Za'Darius Smith situation. Also talk about the Los Angeles Chargers getting 6 primetime games, all that and more coming up next on this Monday edition of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher, and we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in today, making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day. You can subscribe for free, both in video form and in audio form. And today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And we are here today breaking down the biggest stories across the league. And of course, me being one of the NFL's experts here on our channel, I'll be doing that for you with the help of our other NFL experts. As first, we'll be talking with Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns about the Za'Darius Smith trade. Of course, Minnesota, the Vikings trading Za'Darius Smith to the Browns. And we'll talk about if Zadarius Smith is the final piece that Cleveland Browns defense needs. Then in the second segment, we'll flip over and talk with Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings, as obviously Minnesota traded him to Cleveland, so we'll get the Minnesota side of things from Luke. And then finally, we'll flip over to the Los Angeles Chargers. Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers will be helping us break down the Chargers schedule and them getting a league-high 6 primetime games, tied with a couple other teams in there too. So a ton to dive into here on Locked On NFL. So without any further ado, let's first dive into our conversation with Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns. The Cleveland Browns, they made a splash on Friday. They got Za'Darius Smith from Minnesota Vikings here to talk about that with me as the host of Locked On Browns, Jeff Lloyd. And Jeff, it seemed like Cleveland, Jadeveon Clowney, not coming back here. The Browns, they wanted to get someone next to Myles Garrett. And they get that with Za'Darius Smith, who obviously from his time in Baltimore, Green Bay, Minnesota, has proven to be one of the better pass rushers in this league. Were you surprised that Cleveland actually went out there and got this guy?
I would say the guy, yes. I think if you had spoken to any Cleveland Browns fan, of course, everybody that does what we do in content, we would have thought maybe the Browns were still interested, maybe a veteran defensive tackle. But then you look at it and, here's a player. And look, Kevin, obviously you got the opportunity to cover him. We talked about him when he was first leaving Baltimore as a player. We thought maybe that would be a nice fit. Then, goes to Green Bay. Then he's leaving Green Bay and it's like, all right, well, here's the possibility. It didn't happen. Oh, maybe he's going back to Baltimore. Oh, wait, that didn't happen. So now he's available once again. And it was like, well, maybe here's a shot. And there were some talks between the two at the time. And you get this guy and you get this player, and they've always been smart about how they use Jadeveon Clowney. They try to get, of course, Myles Garrett. They don't want Myles to be the whole show, because when Myles got to be the whole show, which we saw last year in 2022, you can devote a lot to it if you're an offense. So the thing is the joy of having essentially Superman is to make sure Superman gets one-on-ones. Superman wins one-on-ones. So you bring in a player like Za'Darius Smith. But now this is what I like about it is, Myles is a great player, and there is some leadership to him. But that's something you're either born with or you're not. It's innate. It's in who you are. So Za'Darius Smith is that guy. I mean, I don't remember if he was a captain for the Ravens, but he was a captain for the Packers. He was also captain for the Vikings. So he comes in, if you go back to the day of the NFL Pro Bowl, the day Kobe Bryant passed away, he was the one that set up at halftime when these guys all heard the news. They all did the fadeaway, after a turnover. He's just got that, personality to him. And the Browns need those type of guys on that defense. It's one thing to have a bunch of great players, but it's going to have the guys that hold it all together. 10 sacks last year, a lot of QB hurries. And there's times where he's really good against the run when he can buy in. But the Browns already have Myles Garrett. They have Ogbonna Okoronkwo. They have Za'Darius Smith now. You have Isaiah McGuire you drafted in the 3rd round. Then you still have Alex Wright and Isaiah Thomas from last year. So there's a chance, as you understand these guys are getting older, you can give them less reps. Try to get the most out of them. And the thing I really love about this is, you look at the two teams that played in the Super Bowl last year. Kansas City Chiefs, what they do in the 1st round, drafted an edge rusher. Philadelphia Eagles. Look at that defensive line. And what did they do in the first round? 2 picks. Drafted another defensive tackle and drafted another defensive end. Kevin, like, it's the calling card. The thing is, we can't cover everybody. So the plan is to get to the quarterback to compensate for the fact we know we can't cover everybody.
Yeah, and look, Jeff, we've been working together for a long time. I know you've been pounding the table for defensive line forever for this team. And I think this is a great addition for them. And I know the whole Jadeveon Clowney stint in Cleveland, I don't think went the way that many wanted it to. I mean, how big of an upgrade? I know health is a big thing here, but how big of an upgrade is Za'Darius Smith from Jadeveon Clowney?
Well, look, the first year of Jadeveon Clowney at it was almost $9 million, was fantastic. Year 2 at $14.5 million, you got nothing. And this is why Jadeveon Clowney has never, and look, a great player. But the problem is Jadeveon Clowney can't get out of his own head sometimes. And you were getting $14.5 million anyway. So why did you in the talks of maybe Myles Garrett was being, well, how did you think this was going to work? Did you think they were not trying to do everything they can to set Myles Garrett up? Because ideally, you want Myles Garrett, when it is a nickel or dime, to say, you know what? You kick outside because this guard is terrified just staring at me. So I'm going to ball pass. You want Myles Garrett to do whatever Myles Garrett can do. Freelance. He is that type of guy. But it means sometimes, you're going to get different. But you tell them you're going to play nickel and dime. Here was a team that was struggling, was going to play 11 games with a backup quarterback. You don't need the malcontents. It's weird to have malcontents on the Cleveland Browns because usually malcontents come from teams where they've always won. And, so it's like, oh, well, you're entitled. And, so it was just better. But the thing, and that's why the Za'Darius Smith thing is huge, because he is a team guy and he's about doing his job. And everybody playing together, playing within a unit, he understands the opportunity here. And if you look at it from the Browns standpoint, they had a lot of issues getting up to the quarterback last year, but it was, 15 for Myles, 10 for Za'Darius Smith, 8 for Okoronkwo. There's 33. That's pretty much more sacks than the Browns had last year anyway to begin with. So now what does everybody else do? And you have a team that gets after the quarterback well. But the Browns need more guys who are bought in and less individual. They had that already on the offensive side of the football, which cost them basically a season and a half. And then they had it last year on the defensive side of the ball, which cost them another half a season. Yeah,
and now I think with not only what they've done with the player side of things, with the coaching side of things, Jim Schwartz is the new guy.
It's not going to happen under that. It's not going to happen under him.
No, you have to be disciplined. I mean, the Jim Schwartz defense, you have to be disciplined in that unit. How does Za'Darius Smith fit into what Jim Schwartz wants to do now with Cleveland?
Well, I think what it is you understand when you have a player like Myles and it's the freelance ability to do whatever you have to do. Za'Darius Smith, his hurries, they're even still contested, but he has a great ability of inner strength to walk blockers back, even if he cannot get off it. So like he understands, all right, I'm going to bowl this, even if it's not going to lead to anything. Because guess what? Even if I did, I'm sort of in the way because now the quarterback has to manipulate his pocket. He's either got to step up. He's got to go the other route. So that's going to be key because Myles, it could be on a stunt. It could be on the inside of the left tackle. It could be on the outside of the left tackle. So you want to limit what the quarterback can do within the pocket. Most of these sacks happen because guess what? One tackle was pushed back, a guard was pushed back, and the only spot you have, it's congested. And this is key, obviously. Kevin, now, it's different now. The Ravens, we talked about this for 2 years. We weren't sure what the future was. You know what it is now, of course. All the AFC North is playing the AFC South this year. Anthony Richardson, you think early on he's going to be that type of player as well. So you need these guys that are going to be able to collapse and keep everything in the middle, especially as we start to gravitate more and more to athletic, greatly gifted running quarterbacks in the NFL, along with the fact that they can throw the ball.
Right. In the AFC North, it's going to be one heck of a division.
The AFC is just scary. The entire AFC is absolutely scary. There's going to be, I would not be surprised if we ended up with either one or two teams with 10 wins that maybe don't make the playoffs in the AFC. That is how ridiculously deep it is.
It is unbelievable. It is a stacked conference. You look at the NFC, you're like, what's going on over there? The AFC has everybody in it. So that's going to be super competitive. But the schedule dropped, Jeff, for all the teams on Thursday night. What'd you like about Cleveland's schedule and what didn't you like?
Well, the back nine, to speak, Kevin, seems very, very favorable. A lot of the easier games are on the back end of the schedule. That Thursday night game in Week 17 against the Jets. And, the Browns, the ultimate goal is, that you're trying to win the AFC North. So if you had 10 days of rest, and we all agree probably that the Bengals right now are the best in show in the AFC North. I think we're all safe in saying that. But then you have 10 days. to go play the Cincinnati Bengals, and hopefully what you is an opportunity to either secure, steal, whatever, the AFC North. The beginning is, that first 6 weeks, that's tough, man. I ain't gonna lie, because obviously it's you guys, the Steelers, the Titans, the Bengals. I'm not going to put their defense there yet, although DJ Reader's a beast. But then they have the bye week, and it's the Niners. That's a lot of physicality, man, over the first 6 weeks, even with the bye, because everybody's like, oh, well, the early bye. I'm like, well, look who they're playing, 2 through 4. They're all physical. And then you got to come right back for San Francisco. But they don't travel much, which is good. There's some games that could look favorable for them. Jacksonville coming to Cleveland in December. That looks like that could maybe be a little bit more advantageous to them. Maybe that game doesn't play as well, when it's 30 and wins for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But the other thing is, and everybody gets so up in arms about it. Look, we all know what the schedules are. Question is, when do the games actually come? There was going to be a tough spot. They could either go one of two ways. I mean, they could kind of run away and hide, because by week 10, they'll play 5 of 6 conference games. And then they have a soft back 9 before, closing with Cincinnati. Or it's going to be really, really hard to gain ground, because even if they have a great second half, they only have 1 division game. So how much ground, it's almost going to feel like you're just treading water every week, because what are the odds that everybody in the North is going to lose every week, especially considering that there's going to be weeks where they're all playing each other.
Big shout out to Jeff for hopping on talking Za'Darius Smith. And for more on Jeff's work, be sure to check out the Locked On Browns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be diving into the other side of that Za'Darius Smith trade with Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings. So be sure to stay tuned. A ton to dive into on Locked On NFL. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now, new customers can get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back. And bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And conference finals are set. And I'm a big Denver Nuggets guy, so I'm excited for this conference finals. They're going up against the Lakers. So if you want to look at FanDuel's odds on that, they have a ton that they offer. They have great promotions every day. They're a safe and secure app, and you can also get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet all the action than America's #1 sports book in FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get a no sweat first bet. It's $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back. Our second segment, Locked On NFL, here on Monday. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. We just talked with Jeff Lloyd of Locked On Browns about the Za'Darius Smith trade, but we're going to get the other perspective now. Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings will join us, and we'll dive into the Minnesota side of things, why it potentially made sense for Minnesota here, the compensation. Also, Dalvin Cook and what could be next for him in Minnesota. So let's get into that now. The Minnesota Vikings had a busy Friday trading Za'Darius Smith to the Cleveland Browns. Here to talk about that and more with me is Luke Braun, the host of Locked On Vikings. And Luke, with this deal, there's a lot to dive into, because obviously the Za'Darius Smith era kind of started off weird with the whole Baltimore situation. Where he signed there and then didn't, then signed, then didn't. Had a really good year with Minnesota, but it just seems like when the offseason started, it wasn't meant to be anymore. The Vikings move on from him, trade him to Cleveland. They get something for him. I mean, were you surprised this deal happened? And what are you going to remember about the Za'Darius Smith Vikings era?
Yeah, Za'Darius Smith was a grand old time. Like, I think there's never going to be any ill will with we were just a stop on his journey from here to there. Okay. But I mean, he came to the Vikings and immediately gave them a burst of energy. I think that they were missing a real, a real locker room impact, I guess is what I would say. But yeah, the deal didn't surprise me very much. We knew that he wanted a better contract. And he was, he didn't want to play on the provisional version of the contract he signed when everybody was worried about his back. Played every game of the season, and he wanted, to be, for that to be recognized in his contract. But whatever negotiation they had, he asked for his release earlier in the offseason. The Vikings say, well, let's try to work something out after the draft. And then after the draft comes, they try to work something out. Must have been a non-starter because it didn't go very far. And then they start fielding trade offers. They flip him to the Browns for meager compensation. So great stuff for the Browns, considering that they also don't even take on the full contract. The Vikings actually take on some of the cap in the deal too. But they got what they could for him, and it's sort of all right, yeah, this contract doesn't work for you anymore, so we'll go our separate ways, but we'll at least get something back. But it was really I guess if that was the way Za'Darius Smith was going to handle it, it was always going to be a 1-year rental, and that's okay.
And wasn't he? You mentioned locker room. Wasn't he the one who started the chain thing for them?
Allegedly, yes, he was the first one to give Kirk Cousins the chain on the plane back from, I believe it was Washington, and then everybody else started getting in. But sources tell me that Za'Darius Smith was the first. Yeah,
inside information here. This is what you tuned into the show for. The inside sources about the chains with Kirk Cousins. But I know that there's been a lot of storylines surrounding Minnesota this offseason. Luke, another one being Dalvin Cook. Seems like there's a split there between the two. Obviously, at least at the time of this recording, it's not official. But does that shock you at all that they're moving on seemingly so quickly here?
That has been known for a while. The reporting, the rumors and conjecture have all been about whether or not the Vikings could find a trade partner. But it's been known for a while that Dalvin Cook's not going to be a Viking. There might be something, a delay based on having to wait until June 1st. If your team cut a player with a post June 1st designation, you don't get those cap savings until it is actually after June 1st. And that cap space might be what that team needs to facilitate Dalvin Cook. So maybe that's the holdup here, or maybe they're just trying to kind of hold out and try to get a trade partner, but they won't. There's now, I think, a little bit more conjecture about them just releasing him, which is also fine. Either way, he's not going to be a Viking, and the running back room is going to be Alexander Mattison and backup singers.
Is there any reason why this is going? Like, is there any reason why they're moving on from him at this point? Is it contract, age, injuries?
Yeah, I think it's time. The contract that he signed in 2020 kind of always felt like a 3-year deal with a 5-year deal on it. So it was, it wasn't, it's not that surprising to see them kind of move on from here. This was sort of at this point, I mean, he cost like $14 million. You kind of knew, all right, they're not going to pay a running back $14 million when he's got a shoulder made out of pulled pork, which he just did have a surgery on. So we are told that that's not going to be an issue anymore, but obviously, you got to see it to believe it. And they have, they like Alexander Mattison. They brought him back. They've now got 2 running backs that Kwesi drafted. Dalvin Cook was a Rick Spielman guy. So was Mattison. Now they have a room that I think they feel better about going by committee. And it's not very Sean McVay-ish to go with like a bell cow. And Kevin O'Connell is a Sean McVay guy. It's a lot more common in those offenses to see a truer committee.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You say they feel good about that room, Luke, but how do you feel about that room with Mattison seemingly being the lead guy with the others filling in?
There's too many unknowns. I don't know. I don't even know who's going to make the team, who's going to play. Mattison has always been kind of just a guy to me. I've never been the biggest Mattison fan. I even thought he was going to maybe be a surprise camp cut last year. He proved me way wrong. And I actually think he had the best season of his career in 2022. So maybe he's kind of found a new way to be, but he's a north-south up and down thumper. He's a goal line back, that kind of guy. And guys like Ty Chandler and Kene Nwangwu give us like a speedier element. And Ty Chandler in particular can do a lot of the utility stuff in the pass game, pass pro and stuff. Those are kind of his strengths. And then Dwayne McBride wasn't really involved in the pass game at all at UAB, but he's super electric and dynamic in space. So maybe that's the guy, you give a screen to, or you have just try to give him a sweep to the outside and get him one-on-one with a cornerback or something.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how they maneuver that room. I mean, I like Mattison, I like Chandler, I like McBride, but obviously, Dalvin Cook has the proven track record, so we'll see how they maneuver there. But Luke, in terms of the schedule, it dropped on Thursday night. What did you like and what did you not like about that for them?
I thought it dropped okay for them. I don't know. The order of games can only really be so much of a factor, but hey, the only cold weather game they have in December, the only outdoor game they have in December is in Cincinnati. That could be worse, right? They aren't going to Lambeau in December or January. They aren't going to Soldier Field December or January. Those are the kind of when those home field advantages get the most intense, and you don't have to do any of that. They don't have any super crazy road trips. They have one where they go to Vegas and then the next week they play in Cincinnati. So you're changing time zones a lot, but otherwise they only have back-to-back road games one other time in the whole season. It's very interesting that they end this with 2 of 3 games against the Lions. Week 16 and 18 are both against the Lions. If that is where the division comes down to, and it very much could, to be a pretty interesting way to wrap out the season, to have, if the Vikings and Lions are both at the top of the division, not actually seeing each other until the very end, and then playing each other twice over the span of 14 days. That's pretty crazy.
Huge shout out to Luke for talking Za'Darius Smith, Dalvin Cook, Vikings schedule, a ton of Vikings content there. And for more Vikings content, be sure to check out Luke's work over at the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. But coming up in our final segment, we'll be talking with Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers about the Chargers getting a league high 6 primetime games, Quentin Johnston and more. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot still to come here on Locked On NFL. We're back rounding out Locked On NFL Monday style. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you, rocking with you on this Monday, the day after Mother's Day. So I hope all the mothers out there had a great Mother's Day. Again, shout out to my mom. I love you, Mom, and everything that you've done for me. And I hope everybody had, again, a great day with their moms or celebrating their moms. So now we're going to dive into Locked On Chargers with Daniel Wade here and talk about the Chargers and why they got a league high 6 primetime games. We'll talk about the Quentin Johnston pick and a lot more. So let's dive into that now. Los Angeles Chargers, one of the NFL's primetime darlings. 6 games, the max here for Los Angeles. Here to talk about that and more with me, Daniel Wade, one of the hosts over at Locked On Chargers. And Daniel, this is a team, obviously, it's explosive with Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, etc. This is an explosive offense. And hey, they have pieces on defense too. They absolutely do there. Obviously, I think they want a bit more from that unit, but we will see what they do. Were you surprised that the Chargers ended up being one of these teams that got the max amount of primetime games?
I was a little bit. I think when you look back at their last season and, 5 primetime games last year, it was kind of surprising to me. And they didn't win a lot of them, but a lot of them ended up being pretty good games. So I think maybe that played a factor in it too. I mean, especially the only thing I think that was surprising is that you got 6 primetime games and none of them are Chargers Chiefs, because since Justin Herbert has taken over, I mean, those games have come down to the wire pretty much every time. He's only taken them down one time, the great Patrick Mahomes, but those games seem to always kind of live up to the hype. It's going to be really interesting, man, because the Chargers have a lot going on. There's a lot to prove, I think, in this season for the head coach, for the general manager. Justin Herbert, I think we all kind of know what he is at this point, but it's going to be under the spotlight, right? It's going to be under the magnifying glass. You better hope you're good, because if you're not, you're going to be seen a lot by the whole, country, and you're going to have to prove it kind of, 6 times out of 17 games, man. It's going to be crazy. And then you have week 18, which is Chargers Chiefs. I think all you're hoping is, hey, maybe that game means something in week 18. Maybe that game gets flexed into prime time. It's going to be crazy, man. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of primetime games.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I know with the schedule dropping, you get that information. But I know with some of these players the Chargers have, Daniel, Austin Eckler has been a huge part of what they've done on offense over the course of his Chargers tenure. But there's a little bit of turmoil there, it seems, right now. Do you have any updates on the situation and whether Eckler will be a member of the Chargers or just playing for them this year?
The latest update was that during the draft, there was basically nothing that came into the Chargers as far as other teams being interested in trying to pull something off with them for it. And it's a very complicated situation, Kevin, because the running back market is so bad right now, right? Me and you talked about it a little bit before we got on. It's just I don't see a situation or a scenario. And I guess I would say besides major injury, right? A major bell cow back, which there's only a few of them now in the NFL, goes down. Maybe that changes the picture a little bit. But for the Chargers, if you're going to lose the guy who had 38 touchdowns for you the last 2 seasons, you would think you'd be wanting an immediate contributor from that, right? You'd think you'd want a pick in this last draft class, in the 2023 draft, and they didn't get it. And what they need, or what Austin Eckler needs in this situation, is not only to go find someone willing to trade draft compensation for him, right? Trade a 5th round, 6th round pick for him, but also give him a double-digit $1 million extension that starts at the age of 29. This is going to, he's going to have his age 28 season this year. So whatever extension happens isn't going to be starting until he's 29. And you look at Zeke Elliott's 27 years old, right? These running backs are not getting paid that at that part of their career. They're not getting that 3rd contract, which is what Austin Eckler is getting. And man, the dude has outproduced his contract a ton. Like, he deserves a raise. He deserves an extension, but it's such a tricky game when you're talking about running backs who can just hit that production cliff, right? I think his game ages well, but to think someone's going to give him, a 2-3 year, $10+ million extension and trade the Chargers draft compensation for it, I don't think it's going to happen. And I think that's a good thing for the Chargers because they really need him this year. Like, this is a contending year for them. I don't think they would be able to, recoup anywhere near the value he's going to bring to the 2023 season.
Yeah, and he provides so much for them, and the running back position is just in such a bad spot right now. I hope for the sake of those guys it's able to get a little better, but the Chargers, they take a position that I think is flourishing in the first round in wide receiver, Quentin Johnston out of TCU at 21. How does he kind of fit what the Chargers want to do, and how'd you like the rest of their draft?
So Kevin's only asking me this because he's the host of Locked On Ravens, and he knows I wanted Zay Flowers, so he's rubbing in my face a little bit here. No, but it grew on me. It wasn't the guy I wanted right away. I mean, I think the testing numbers kind of put him in the pack with the rest of those guys because when you're talking about physically, right, there was one dude who stood out, literally in that group, and it was Quentin Johnston, right? The only guy over 6 foot that was taken in the first round. He's 6'2", over 200 pounds. And then, talking about other guys like Zay Flowers, 5'8", 5'9", Jordan Addison, 5'11", Jackson Smith and Jigba, right? Another sub 6 foot guy. So like he was kind of in his own, tier there as far as guys with size. And the Chargers don't take guys who are under 6 foot, right? Like Tom Telesco in his entire career has taken 1 5'10" and under wide receiver, and the dude got cut before the season started. So like they have a type. We probably should have seen the writing on the wall all along because that's the kind of guy they go for. Keenan Allen, 6'3", Mike Williams, 6'4". Like they like that type of receiver. And I do think the part that's grown on me is seeing how he fits, right? Because Keenan Allen plays great outside. And last year what happened was Keenan Allen, when he was in there and he wasn't injured, had to play a ton on the outside because the third receiver was someone like DeAndre Carter, who's a small guy. Michael Bandy, an undrafted free agent who's 5'10", 190 pounds. And like, we didn't get to see Keenan Allen used the way he's used best. With Quentin Johnston in the mix, now you have a situation where you can have him on the outside and Mike Williams on the outside with Keenan Allen in the slot. And I think for maximum efficiency, that was the best way to go. And you have someone next year, right, Kevin, when Keenan Allen's going to be making $30+ million next year. Mike Williams is also going to be making $30+ million next year because of the restructures they did to have space this season. You're giving yourself a plan, right? You're not putting yourself in a box to where next year you're going to have to make some tough decisions with no backup plan, with no contingencies in place. So immediately, I think he fills one big role, yards after the catch. Teams love to play Justin Herbert with deep safeties and make him have to go underneath. Now you actually have someone that can punish that, right? Look back to the Georgia game in the semifinals of the college football playoff. Like, this dude was running away from opposing defenses, clocked in at over 21 miles an hour on the GPS. So, like, he brings that to the table. One of the most electric, him and Zay Flowers, the two most electric yards after the catch guys in this draft. He fits that immediately, but I also like that they're building for the future and just not being content with the weapons that they had, the speed that they had. They had a huge lack of speed. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, that's not their game. He brings some undoubted explosiveness to the offense, and I like that part of it. And I like more the fact that they're committed to just surrounding Justin Herbert with as many weapons as possible.
Huge thanks to Daniel. And for more on the Chargers, be sure to check out Daniel's work over at the Locked On Chargers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to subscribe to the channel on YouTube, follow along in audio form, subscribe for free, no money involved here on Locked On NFL. Thank you for tuning in again. We'll see you right back here tomorrow with your Tuesday hosts, more NFL content. So thank you for tuning into this Monday edition of Locked On NFL, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.